Chris Moody. We're back on OnBase today, and we're doing a live show in Austin, Texas. So I'm here today with Davis Potter. We're going to talk about account-based. We're going to talk about some misconceptions and dive into account-based measurement. Davis, welcome to the show.
What's going on, Chris? Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, it's awesome being in a real space. I just do this in my office, which is like a dungeon at this point.
Yeah.
This is cool hanging out in real life. But I'd love for folks to understand your journey and what led you to doing ForgeX and some of the things you're doing today.
So a little bit about my background. Initially started in an organization, billion in revenue. So got to see, how they made their transition from a more demand generation play and to the full account-based marketing approach. They essentially, right when I joined, did a full conversion over, and that was really interesting. We were deeply focused on one-to-one and one-to-few as part of the financial services vertical. So got to see the challenges and what it was like to scale that across multiple different geos as well. So went from Pega, then I went to Google Cloud to help them launch their first ABM programs. Again, was doing one-to-one, one-to-few, very, very much so on the one-to-few side. And I wanted to get some experience in, hyper growth startup space, see what it was like on that side, because I'd been in the larger organizations, got to see what it was like to launch, scale, and then optimize the programs over there. So then I went to Scale AI, which was fascinating. And we'll chat about this later in the podcast too, because going from that larger organization to the smaller really shaped my perception around definitions of ABM. We had to launch an operating framework for a more one-to-many approach because, again, we don't have the resources like some of these larger organizations do to do the pure one-to-one, one-to-few. And even the definitions of those. We'll have to chat about this, whether it's in this podcast or another one. But that's a little bit about my background, and that ultimately led to ForgeX. So we saw this unique perspective in the market based off of how organizations were actually approaching ABM and the way in which they deployed it. We noticed, all right, there's this way in which they're doing it. They're starting to adopt it across the entire organization, so holistic account-based go-to-market strategy. And that initial pyramid with one-to-one, one-to-few, and one-to-many, which is widely adopted, helped us get here. So it's a very successful and an incredible model, but the challenge behind it came out in 2016. It's now 9 years old, and we were waiting for that evolution, didn't see it. So we said, all right, we need to launch an analyst firm. We need to build the modernized approach, not only to the deployment models, but the operating framework in which you ultimately design, scale, and optimize, and then also the measurement aspect. So the unified data model. How do you wrap it all together in account-based measurement?
Love that. I thought you were going to set up a trap when you started. So I was going to dive into that, but it was really interesting. You talked about transitioning from demand gen into account-based. And one of the biggest traps that you and I both know is folks doing targeted demand gen and calling it account-based. So to the definition point, this is something that we've seen tons and tons and tons of times in the last 10 years or so. So you talked about 9 years for the pyramid. Folks will call something account-based. They'll say we're doing account-based, and then they're really just doing demand gen to a broader audience. But you talked about going from demand gen straight into one-to-few. So you did kind of hedge and say, well, this is a larger company with the budget. But I'd love to understand some of the reasoning to go straight from demand gen into one-to-few, because I love that approach. But maybe for folks who haven't done that, what was some of the cause or, the belief to say, let's go straight from this scaled demand gen model into focusing on a smaller set of high value accounts?
This organization was a bit unique. And again, if you're a go-to-market leader, everyone's strategy is going to be tailored to your specific org. So the reason behind why that made sense for this organization was the average deal size and the revenue potential within these accounts was massive. So these are multi-million-dollar, multi-year deals where if you're closing one, that's 20 plus million.
Yeah.
So it made sense to put that high resource concentration on that one to few, where it was, we define one to few as 25 accounts or less in that cluster based approach. So as one practitioner, you can if you're just doing that, you can cover four pretty comfortably, and sometimes even less. Very much depends on how much resource and time you're putting into those accounts. But it made sense for that organization, given the fact that if you close a few of those, you're gonna have a solid return on that investment.
Yeah, I love that. Back in the days of Topo, we actually had one client that would pick one account per quarter just to build out that motion. Now, they were massive deals, but they would do things like rent out racetracks and do custom experiences. But it was that exact reasoning, because with understanding your business, you can figure out these are the most important things for us. So I love that. For the folks who may be in a demand gen world and people are talking about account based, but they know that they're not doing account based, what would be some of your guidance to say, here's how you should get started?
So it's interesting on the demand gen side, because if we're kind of going to set the stage for what these practitioners are doing, you're probably using an MQL based measurement model.
Yep.
So you're really focused on top of funnel. How do I generate these contacts or leads that are ultimately going to hit XYZ engagement threshold or some type of threshold that converts them into the MQL? Then you're passing it over to sales. And you have this whole dichotomy of, marketing generates these qualified people, and then you throw them over the fence to sales and say, hey, sales, go close them. So that being one aspect. And then the other piece is the list. So if you're running demand gen, it depends on the organization, but we see this all the time, where you created this list based off of firmographic data. Maybe you overlaid a little bit of third-party intent, and you're like, wow, this is amazing. This is going to crush. This is what we're going to push all of our resources into, this large, broad list of accounts. Maybe it's a couple thousand. Maybe it's multi-thousand, like 10,000 plus. And that's what you're going after. It doesn't really, or maybe it has a little bit of overlap with sales, but you haven't found a holistic approach to how you're building these target account lists. So if that's what you're doing for the demand gen side, if you think about some of the components behind that, one, you're not unified on a list. So your sellers are probably even structured in a strategic seller, enterprise, mid-market, a PLG, or some type of self-serve. So they have some operating framework behind how they're segmenting their accounts, and they're placing their resources, they're placing their talent based off of this and the skill set that their sellers all have. And then you have the marketing team who isn't really doing that. They're just taking this broad list, which probably doesn't even overlap or doesn't in a small degree, and they're just working to get these leads that qualify over. So it's the unification. It is the measurement and reporting. How do we get to a more holistic measurement approach where we're actually partnering with the sellers to identify these are the members of the buying group within XYZ accounts that are part of a unified target account list, that we didn't just use firmographic and third-party intent only to build. And then you're also looking at, if you're doing demand gen, you're probably going to convert over to a more one-to-many style of operating framework. My guess is you've tiered your account. So maybe it's 1, 2, 3. The tiers dictate how much resources, maybe even tactical eligibility. So you could say, executive VIP dinner is eligible for tier 1 accounts, where tier 3 accounts, not so much. Tier 1 obviously having a lower concentrate of accounts, and then medium and tier 2, larger in tier 3. Sometimes you don't even need a tier 3 depending on your organization. But, thinking about, all right, if I'm going to cover hundreds or, 1,000 of account using this tiered approach, how do I transition these accounts throughout their account-based journeys as well? So it's like account-based journey from unengaged to engaged to qualified to active pipeline, close one. What does that progression look like? while also thinking and considering about the buying groups. So partnering throughout the entirety of the sales cycle. That is the account-based approach and the magic behind it. And that's a very long answer for why you should transition, but it's also some of the underlying root causes behind it. And Chris, I'm curious from your perspective. I mean, one of the founders and the pioneers of Topo's double funnel, which was widely adopted, and there are a lot of misconceptions behind that as well. And from a measurement and reporting standpoint, in my opinion, it is the bridge to account-based measurement and reporting. And I'm dying to hear more of your thoughts on that and making the transition over.
Yeah, well, the first thing, you set it up properly. It's not a recommendation for a go-to-market strategy, right? There was one thought leader that tried to say that and tore it to pieces. No, that's not what it is. It's to say there were a ton of folks who were struggling to understand, how do I measure the success of account base? Because most would go to the closed one account, which we know could take a year in a lot of sales cycles. So if you're only looking at success of account base as closed one, that's hard to justify hiring and expenses and here's how much we're spending per account to hope that they convert at the end of the funnel. So the first thing we set out to do was to try to say, how can we take the world that we're all used to, which is lead to MQL to SQL to opt to close one. That's the world we've all lived in, that waterfall. How can we take that and then overlay some of the benchmarks that existed at Topo? So the first piece was looking at stage by stage conversion, which I geek out on that. I mean, we have to understand where things are working. So we actually set out to take that lead all the way through closed one model and then sit beside the account-based funnel and figure out which are the approximate stages. So it's not to say it's a perfect match or one-to-one. And we know that sometimes we get leads from target accounts that we need to route to account-based. So it's trying to take the simplest approach to look at multiple ways to measure things. And I'll be completely honest. I mean, I thought the epiphany was benchmarking account-based and volume and velocity or demand gen and putting them side by side, because to me, that's what I wanted. Craig Rosenberg was very quick to flag that the epiphany was actually a really simple construct for side by side measurement. So any segment, you just talked about tiers or different segments, or you might have a PLG function. Any way that you go to market, the construct of double funnel was to say, take that from start to finish through your entire funnel and put it side by side with all the others. It's not to say one's better than the other, right? Like, we know every company has to have a mix. Our go-to-market strategy usually is not going all in on just PLG or all in on just demand gen or only tier one. There's always the mix. But when we could get to a spreadsheet view and have column one of, 1-to-1 accounts, column 2 of 1-to-few, column 3 of 1-to-many, and then, gradually add in all the different tiers, we could do a highlighter exercise. So quite literally, it would be a big spreadsheet, Google Sheets, Excel, whatever you like, Smartsheet, it doesn't matter. But you would go through and highlight areas of top performance and areas of lowest performance, and then try to understand what is our mix. And that could be applied to tactics too. So any attribution model, it was just trying to lead to the conversations of what is working and what is not. And the other thing that we saw a lot, and this is something that I'm sure you'll have lots of stories about, when you're in accounts, you learn very different things than when you're just trying to think in an ivory tower. And that's one thing I would caution everyone to kind of pause and replay, because a lot of the recommendations that we see in our LinkedIn feed, some of them are coming from folks who haven't really done this and haven't done it in a lot of different accounts. And one thing that we saw at Topo, and this happened at Gartner too, you would have folks with amazing tech stacks. They could measure anything to the nth degree, but there was always a pivot that had to happen. So it was a drop-down menu. Oh, I want to look at this, or oh, I want to look at that. And then they could look at everything. But we had one client that said, I'm only converting 1% of my leads from events. And now I'm being told by my CMO that we can't do events. And the first question most of us would say is, Well, is that good? Is that bad? What's the rest of the stuff convert at? Oh, well, let me show you. And they go in their very sophisticated tool. They drop down. Well, here are leads from the website. Oh, well, that's 8%. Yeah, that's good. What about something else? And then they start clicking, but there was never a way to put them side by side by side, even in their very expensive, very sophisticated tool. So it was a simple construct to zoom out, not to say this is going to solve the world for you, but for everything you can measure, if we put it side by side, then we start to figure out those insights. And that leads to the conversations with sales and revenue teams.
So my mind went to a couple different places. The side by side by side, you've got the different account tiers, you have the different ABM deployment models, you have the industries, and then is another layer the channel, or how would you recommend, or what did you see work best behind all those?
I had different tabs in the spreadsheet. It was exactly that.
Yeah.
I mean, it was to say, of all the ways we measure how we go to market, let's start there. Then on tab 2, let's look at all of our tactics or channels. So we weren't able to benchmark that to a granular degree. And we can get into fights about attribution. I mean, we can arm wrestle if you want. But first touch, last touch, multi-touch, it doesn't matter. We said do them all, right? Like have a tab that's first touch attribution. And then here's every tactic we do first touch. But then track that all the way through the funnel. It's not looking for perfect. We know that that's not perfect, right? I mean, everyone knows. Everyone listening goes, well, no, first touch is just telling us how they came in. Yes. Track it through the funnel, though. Let's just see how that looks. Last touch. We know that that's not accounting for a ton of things that happened before. Yes. Track it through the funnel, just with that as our first pivot of how we look at the information. Multi-touch, same thing. But that would be a separate tab, because then what would inevitably happen, we could go through and start to say, okay, well, top of funnel, leads that come to your website are performing really well, and leads that come from webinars are performing really well, right? Like this is a lead world. It can also apply to account base, right? Like we're still talking about people and accounts, but we could start to identify top of funnel, these things work really well. Middle of funnel, these things work really well. And then that first client that we did this for, we actually saw that if someone came to a hosted event, they closed 68% of the time at the bottom of the funnel, right? So that leads us to say, as smart marketers working with our sales team, awesome. How do we get more people to hosted events when they're that far in the buying journey, right? It's not to say, let's do a ton more hosted events. It's to say that's part of our mix and our strategy where we need to have that in the closing motion. But it's hard to get to those insights if you don't look at everything. And look, we pursue perfection. I think that's part of the problem. A lot of us are type A. A lot of us are used to spreadsheets and decision support system classes and all the stuff that we do. We can program in Excel. Many of us can, right? So we're trying to find perfect. And sometimes we just have to look at the whole picture and understand what's working, how is it working, and then what does that lead us to talk about?
So it sounds to me like you were on this whole idea of the signal-based analytics and the signal-based approach even before that word became such a buzzword, because it's basically, looking at first touch, last touch. They're essentially just signals, and it's all right, what are all the signals, or what are all that go-to-market engagement touch points that are happening throughout the full funnel? How do we collect all of them? How do we analyze the patterns of, all right, XYZ is converting extremely well. This other channel or tactic converting very well. Let's put more resources into what's working and also analyze what's not working. How do we either reduce investment in them, and not only from that standpoint, but also looking at the accounts, who's close won, who's close lost.
Yeah.
In the close lost, what does that look like? What's their journey? And it's really interesting when you layer on that whole buying intent piece too, and the different ways in which these organizations are structuring their reporting infrastructure. This is something that I find so fascinating. It's, do you have a account-based go-to-market platform? Are you doing it in-house using your data warehouse and trying to configure and construct all of these various different systems into one place. You probably have a data and analytics team if you're doing it in that way. Are you using the custom object in a Salesforce or using a marketing automation platform? How you're doing it and whatnot. What's your perspective on the best way to measure it? Because you mentioned the spreadsheets too, and a lot of organizations don't have a full-time data analyst, and as a marketing lead, you're trying to configure all of these pieces yourself. What are your thoughts on the whole reporting infrastructure?
Yeah, I think it's kind of $1 million question, right? The first thing, understand your business and what metrics are important to you. It all starts there. And you hit on that earlier too, right? Like depending on your go-to-market strategy, that will dictate which metrics are most important to you. The other part, just natural curiosity can lead you into simple versions of putting things in a spreadsheet to look side by side, right? Like that doesn't require a fancy tool. I'd love to say it does. And like, you need to buy both of us, right? Like I'd love to say that, but we know that that's not always the case, right? When we can have things in tools that we use, whether that's demand-based or another tool, that creates efficiencies of scale. There's consistency. It does become a little more automated where we can look at that report anytime we want. We're not having to pull things out into Excel. So we've done things similar to Double Funnel with clients in demand-based for that reason, right? Like that gives you some easier way to measure it. The other part that I'll say, I think the long-term bet, something that we're talking about a lot at demand-based, is being wherever our customers are. I'd love to tell you all to log into the platform and do everything in the platform, but I think we know that that's not ultimately the future where every single person is going to be in there every single day. So there's a part of embracing concepts from old days of open source just to say we need to better get all of our information and insights into all the places of work. And that's something we're going to be talking about a lot this week. And I think that is even more exciting because it becomes less rigid and it's not, well, you have to go in here and you have to do this and everybody has to be doing the exact same thing. It becomes, yes, that's awesome when you do that, but that's going to be this percentage of people. But for everyone else, they may live in tool 1, tool 2, tool 3. They may aggregate things in tool 4, and tool 5 may be taking all of those insights and spitting out to sales. Here's exactly what you need to do. So with APIs, with agents, a lot of the stuff that's happening with AI, I think that world will change a lot in the next couple of years.
And another thing, even on the platform piece, is this whole notion of third-party intent. Was speaking with a marketing leader just a week ago, and we were talking about the power of the different technologies that can harvest or aggregate all of the signals, put them in one view for your marketing, your sales, and your customer success team. And she was really interested in this third-party intent data, and she's like, oh, we can now have this, layer it on the firmographic, and we're going to create these amazing lists. And what we ultimately ended up chatting through was, yes, you can do that, but the power also comes from the first party engagement data as well. So you have all of this data in your CRM, in all these other systems as well, like your sales outreach tools. Maybe you have a custom landing page platform, a gifting platform. How do you take and aggregate all of that, put it in one spot with third-party intent or any other buying intent signals like job changers or whatnot, and create this really robust 360-degree view of your customers and your accounts and your prospects, not just building these target account lists using third-party intent data. And I think a lot of the perception of this is that it's, all right, I'm going to take this, I'm going to build this list with firmographic, third-party intent, then I'm going to run ads towards it. And I actually saw this the other day where someone ran a benchmark of an account-based approach where they did just that. Third-party list, third-party intent data, made a list, ran ads, and said, all right, this is my ABM approach. And then they said, I'm going to benchmark that versus my SDR team, and both are going to have different lists. which is essentially just running a paid media or a ad campaign to a target account list, and then your BDR, your SDR, they're doing the same thing to cold outreach. And I'm looking at that like, put the two together. That is actual ABM. That is an account-based strategy. It's not these segmented or siloed approaches. It's how do I bring in all go-to-market teams, unify them around this account-based go-to-market strategy.
Yeah, I mean, if this was easy, we wouldn't still be talking about it, right? Like you talked about the tiering from 9 years ago. I think it's going to take everyone working together to pull that off, because it's really easy to just trust any benchmark or any survey. I actually had a LinkedIn comment conversation about this. I shared some account-based stats, and a very savvy analytical professor jumped in and was like, yeah, but there's always bias in these because you're talking to people who are already doing account-based, which are probably further along on the sophistication maturity scale. And the answer is yes, that's true. I mean, if you look at any data from Topo, that was high growth SaaS. That's already going pretty far along on the maturity model, right? You look at a Gartner or a Forrester, right? That's massive scale. When you look at those organizations, you don't have a lot of smaller high growth startups that are investing there yet. Not a huge statistically significant skew the sample size. So that gave us the ability to kind of compare one versus two. And I know with what you're doing at ForgeX too, right? Like you have a different data set that you're seeing, and how you can start to pull all of that information together. But you can't just chase a benchmark that says one thing, because to your point, it might just be, oh, this is really just running an ad campaign, right? Like it's not doing anything personalized. It's not getting anywhere close to a high value offer. It's not really the entire revenue team. That could be one person in marketing that's just like, cool, here's my list. Let's spend more. And yeah, I mean, you always have to dig into these things. A lot of the reports that I see, I mean, that's one of the back channel conversations. I think everyone goes to the footnotes, like who was in this survey, how was this run? But look, these aren't easy things. So consume all the information, try to look at all the insights we can, and make better decisions that way.
Yeah, and it's challenging too because even when you look across organizational sizes, it's hard to compare if you're a 50 million ARR SaaS company versus a 20 billion when you're looking at ABM program data and trying to map up, your benchmark versus them. That is why it's not apples to apples. It's not even in the same realm.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, there are organizations that have teams dedicated to funnel stages too, right? Like a lot of folks who may be listening are going, I'm the ABM person, right? Like me, one. Other places, that's not the case. I mean, there are pods in a lot of companies where they might be cross-functional teams. They might do other things, but it might be 4 people assigned to 5 accounts. And they're going very deep in those accounts and understanding the entire buyer group. So that's one of the things that I think we have to be smart with our technology usage, our partner usage, and really build out the right playbook for our organization, because there will never be a uniquely perfect benchmark or insight for every single company in the world. There's always a disclaimer or a caveat. That became part of my terminology when I would describe any benchmark too. It was, look, you need to remember this is from a high growth SaaS data set. So this is not to say that your performance against this is good or bad. This is saying we studied the fastest growing companies in the world to understand what they were doing and then try to figure out what we should do with that information. Because if we just compare to benchmarks, right? I think finger in the air 15 years ago, when I was talking to my CMO then, was, yeah, we should convert 20% of our opportunities. And benchmark data is showing 19%. That has not changed in 15 years, but that's not to say that we might work in an organization where it's 5% or 70%. So we can't look at our success that way. So there are always indicators and things that we need to customize or flex to us, because every organization is different. To your point, I mean, a team of 5 or a company of 5 is very different than a company of 5,000. And sometimes you might actually get more coverage and more play with a team of 5 than a team of 5,000, right? Like we've seen it. We've all worked with companies where things don't move very fast.
And have heard the frustrations from the ABM leaders
Yeah.
of which it's not moving very fast.
Yeah. Easy renewals, hard to get the metrics you want, right? Because sometimes people need a change agent just to try to break things up. But
the metrics, the red tape when it comes to cross-functional partnerships too. I mean, just even thinking about some of the time it takes to get an asset up and running from building it, the legal perspective too. We hear that frustration all the time, the technology too, going through all of the security processes. It's in some of those larger organizations, you are at you're at an advantage because you have more resources, but the disadvantage is some of the time. And if you're a smaller ABM, team or a smaller organization who's running an account-based approach, there's your advantage. Go run fast.
yeah. Yeah, that's one of the reasons I love side-by-side measurement too, right? You might actually see insane performance in a certain pocket, and then you start to understand, oh, wait, that's the set of accounts with less red tape. Like that, those are new people that don't know the ways to work together and collaborate. And they might step on toes, right? But you might actually see the paths with less friction perform better. So it's always a different way to interpret the data in every organization. And I think that's the beauty of a business like yours, right? When you can dig into each of those accounts, because that's the piece I would really encourage everyone, understand your business very, very well. And then inevitably there are differences in who the seller is, right? I mean, A sellers, B sellers, C sellers, it's a real thing. I mean, there are a lot of companies where they tier our tier 1 sellers get our tier 1 accounts. Our tier 2 sellers get our tier 2 accounts. Oh, you want to be a tier 1? Here's what you have to do to go from 2 to 3 or from 2 to 1, right? I mean, that's a real thing. And it's the same with marketing. It's the same with every function. So there's always variability. There's no perfect science to it. But I think the more inquisitive we are to try to figure this out, we'll gradually make it better. And we just have to keep fighting that fight before we chase the next shiny object and stop talking about account-based.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
So one of the big unlocks for me was this disconnect between ABM teams and product marketing. And I haven't seen people speak about this enough, especially when you think about the product marketing teams who are doing a lot of go-to-market strategy. They're doing segmentation. They're presenting this to the board. They're presenting it to the C-suite. They're enabling sellers on this. They're building a bunch of content around it as well. And then you have this ABM team who's kind of talking with them, but not deeply having these conversations around the strategy and kind of threading the needle behind ABM, sales, customer success. But then you have this other marketing function that's doing a lot of strategy. How do you loop that in? Curious to get your perspective on it.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a targeted list of folks who think product marketing is easy, I'd love to have it because I can sell them plenty of things. Product marketing is one of the most challenging functions in the entire revenue team or in the entire company. It's really, really difficult. And I was a product manager for a small amount of time. So I went through a lot of classical pragmatic marketing training and everything. Really understanding your customer is a skill and an art. It's hard to do, and it changes all the time. The fact that there aren't more aligned teams, to your point, is concerning because this is not just cookie cutter persona development that someone might be like, oh, I know my audience. I can sell to them without talking to product marketing. That's just not true. Product marketing is always going to be getting that feedback in real time. They're going to be understanding how the product changes are impacting their customers. And that's messaging that has to be pulled back in. So I think for the folks who aren't aligned with product marketing, it's a huge disservice. It is kind of ironic too, that we always talk about marketing as sales alignment, and that's assuming that marketing is aligned and sales is aligned, right? Like, it's like, well, we all should work together. And then it's like, well, I work great with sales, but I never talk to this whole function of marketing, right? That happens in a lot of organizations. Product marketing cannot be underestimated. I mean, this is not cause correlation, right? We were talking about metrics, but there's a reason product marketing leadership roles typically are compensated higher than other marketing functions, because it's really difficult to align to the technical teams, your product and engineering teams, and then understand your customer, and then be that middle interface of figuring out how do we make sure everything we understand of our customer is continued to be built and improved upon in our product, and then pull them all together. So if there are marketing teams that think, oh, that's just some tangential function that's not involved in selling, like, it's a huge disservice. So I'm happy to record a PSA with you to send that out to folks.
So we're going to need that and a whole dedicated episode just
All
on
right,
that
we can do
specific
it.
topic.
Yeah, bring some product marketing guests with us.
We'll loop them in. Yeah.
We can do it.
And we need some salespeople on that one too, because it's just such a miss. Even so, I had a product marketing leader on our podcast a couple weeks ago, and I wanted to get his perspective on ABM and their ABM team. They have a pretty mature ABM function. They've been doing it for years, multiple dedicated practitioners. And when he would get some requests from the ABM team, for example, on the content side, he'd be like, one, why do we need this? We already have content in this regard. Why do we need to build something entirely custom on this topic when we have content that we can just already configure or personalize for that account? So there's a content miscommunication between the two. Even the segmentation on, all right, this is where our product roadmap is, to your point. They have that deep understanding. ABM should also understand that, but product is living, they're breathing in it, they're creating the messaging, they're creating content, they're enabling the sellers and the overall organization. So from an ABM standpoint, yes, you're probably going out and running some analysis to build your target accounts, trying to uncover what segments or micro segments you're going to be pursuing. But having that really tight alignment with product marketing right up front is massively important, and it's gonna be a shift just for you and a cheat code, because it will align everybody in a way that you're probably not going to have if you're not doing it.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think it needs to happen across the board, and there's a tendency with account base to think only about net new and closing deals, but retention's a huge part of that, and no one is better served to help with retention efforts than product marketing, right? So if you think about everything involved there with understanding at-risk customers, renewal risk, expansion customers, what are those opportunities, what's coming down the product roadmap that could be additional sales opportunities to existing customers. I mean, there's all other things we could unlock with account base there, which we definitely need more time for a full episode on that one. Well, I know we're coming up on time today, which this has flown by. Doing it in person makes the time go even faster, I'm realizing. But I like to ask a couple questions of every guest. The first, we call it good reads, but is there a book, blog, newsletter, or podcast that really stands out to you as most helpful?
One newsletter that I love is by Tyler Pleiss. It's called The Pleiss is Right, and it comes out every Sunday. He just launched a new paid version of it too, and it's super helpful because it's very tactical. And that's one thing I look forward to. And you can get a lot of these, not to say ivory tower-ish content where it's just super high level and it's not really getting into this is truly how it's done. And he does that, which I really appreciate. And he shares some of his stories as he's building his program. So that's definitely a good one I recommend.
Love that one. What about folks who inspire you in the B2B space? Who are some of the people that stand out on your short list?
Couple of people. So one is Akriti Gupta. She is leading marketing over at LinkedIn. From demand gen also to ABM, she is one of the best leaders and also one of the smartest people. So recommend giving her a follow. Desiree Daniels is another one. She leads industry marketing for retail and CPG over at Google Cloud. She is, probably, if you go look at her LinkedIn, she probably has the gold standard for a background in account based. So those are a couple that definitely go give them a follow. And if they're open, definitely try to get a coffee chat in too.
Awesome. And then most important of all, Davis, how can everyone get in touch with you after they watch this or listen to this?
Come connect with me on LinkedIn. Come join our ForgeX community as well. It's free for leaders and practitioners. And it would be doing a disservice if we didn't give a quick plug for our new ForgeX and DemandBase certification courses, which will be coming out within the next few weeks. They are going to be the most comprehensive in market. And so if you're designing, implementing, or scaling your program, account-based GTM course, that's going to be the flagship. But we also built a dedicated course for measurement and reporting. And this includes our modernized unified data model, which we call the account-based arrow. And so definitely check those out as well.
Awesome. Yeah, we're going to have to do another episode once that launches. So I'm looking forward to that. And, I appreciate your time. So thanks for being together in person. I'm realizing now we have not come out with a great handshake or outro to this. So we may have some B-roll footage of us trying to figure that out. But thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me on, Chris, and psyched for our next one.
Awesome. I'll see you soon.